Ladies and gentlemen, we often believe that the people who show up for us will always be there. We grow comfortable with their presence, their patience, their quiet support, so much so that we stop noticing just how much space they hold in our lives. But the truth is, presence is never guaranteed. It's a gift, one that people choose to give us every single day, and if we're not careful, we begin to treat that presence as background noise, something we assume will always be available, no matter how little we acknowledge it. But what happens when that presence disappears? Tonight, I want to talk about something we don't say enough. Value presence before it turns into absence, because by the time you realize what someone meant to you, silence might be all you have left to answer to. Consistency in love is one of the most misunderstood things in relationships. We often mistake it for something automatic, something that should simply be there, like breathing. We think that once someone loves us, their care, their affection, their presence will naturally follow. But love doesn't sustain itself, not in the way we assume it does. Consistency is not a byproduct of feelings, it's an act of intention. When someone shows up for you every day, checks in, supports you when you're down, and remembers the little things that matter to you, those aren't reflexes. Those are decisions, repeated, conscious decisions made in your favor. It's a person waking up and choosing to invest in the relationship, even when life is busy, even when they're tired, even when things feel routine. That effort isn't born out of obligation. It's born out of commitment and care, and yet we take consistency for granted the most. When it becomes familiar, we stop seeing it. We begin to expect it. That good morning message every day. We scroll past it. That hand on your back when you're overwhelmed. We start assuming it'll always be there. The emotional space someone gives us, the patience they extend during our difficult days, the willingness to listen when we speak for the 100th time about something that matters only to us, all of that starts to blend into the background noise of daily life. We forget that it takes effort to show up that way. What we fail to realize is that consistency is not maintained by magic. It's maintained by choice, and that choice isn't always easy. It's made in moments when they're frustrated, when they feel neglected, when their own needs are unmet. It's made when they could pull away, but don't. It's made when they could ignore your pain, but choose to care instead. That's why it's dangerous to assume that someone's love is infinite just because it's been steady. We believe falsely that someone who has been consistent in love will always be there, regardless of how little we reciprocate. But even the most loving person gets tired. Even the one who always texts first eventually stops texting when they feel their presence is no longer noticed, or worse, no longer valued. People don't stop loving all at once, but they do stop showing up when showing up feels one-sided. The scariest part, you often don't realize that consistency has faded until it's already gone, until the morning message doesn't arrive, until the silence stretches too long, until the emotional safety they once gave begins to feel like a memory. And then we wonder what happened, but the truth is, something was happening the whole time. We just weren't paying attention. When someone is consistent with you, they're telling you who they are and how much they care. But that consistency needs fuel, it needs gratitude, it needs reciprocation, not just in the grand gestures, but in the small acknowledgments, a thank you, a how are you, a genuine moment of turning toward them instead of always expecting them to turn toward you. And this goes both ways. If you're the one who's always been consistent, and you're feeling unappreciated, unnoticed, or emotionally drained, you're allowed to stop. You're allowed to pause and ask yourself if this is a space where your effort is mirrored, or if you're pouring into a well that no longer returns water. Consistency in love is one of the most powerful things we can give to another person. But it's also one of the easiest things to misuse or overlook. And if we fail to recognize the beauty and sacrifice within it, we may wake up one day to find that someone's quiet, daily effort was never guaranteed. It was offered, chosen, repeated until it no longer made sense for them to keep choosing what we failed to value. Love isn't about grand declarations. It's about the things we do again and again, especially when it's hard. And the moment we treat that as something permanent, something owed, we stop honoring the person behind the effort. Consistency is beautiful, but it is fragile, and above all, it is a choice. Silence has a way of making us uncomfortable. In a world that thrives on noise, notifications, opinions, reactions, distractions, silence can feel unsettling, almost unnatural, but that discomfort is exactly what makes it powerful. When the noise fades, when the words stop, when the calls stop coming and the messages go unanswered, that's when the real questions begin. Silence is not passive. It's not empty. It is space, and space always invites awareness. It's the moment after the argument ends, when there's nothing left to say, and you're left sitting with your own thoughts. It's the quiet that follows the end of a routine conversation, the one you thought would always happen. And in that quiet, you start to notice what you missed when things were loud. You start to hear what was really going on beneath the surface all along. When someone goes silent, especially someone who once filled your days with warmth, affection, and presence, it's not just the absence of their voice you feel, it's the absence of certainty, and in that void you start to reflect. You start to think about the conversations you brushed off, the moments you didn't fully show up for, the times they tried to be heard and you didn't really listen. You remember what they said with their tone, with their pauses, with their sighs. Things you once dismissed now echo more loudly than words ever could. It's in silence that we confront the parts of ourselves we tried to avoid. When someone stops chasing clarity, stops explaining how they feel, and steps back to protect their peace, we are left to explain things to ourselves. And that's often when it hits the hardest. Not because they shouted, but because they didn't. Their quiet becomes a mirror. Suddenly, we see what they saw, we feel what they felt, and we wonder why we didn't notice it sooner. Silence doesn't accuse, it doesn't argue, it doesn't try to prove a point. It simply holds up a mirror and waits. And if you let it, that silence will teach you. It will teach you about the patterns you repeated. About the moments you minimized, about the love that was being offered right in front of you, gently, consistently, and vulnerably, and how easy it was to overlook it when it was always there. Sometimes the person who once gave you their words so freely chooses silence not out of spite, but out of clarity, because they realized that words without change are just noise, because they finally understood that being heard requires more than listening. It requires value, effort, and presence. And when those things are missing, silence becomes self-respect. It's easy to think someone is being cold or distant when they go quiet. But more often than not, silence is the result of someone who's been loud about their feelings for a long time, someone who tried to explain, to engage, to fix, and finally realized they were pouring energy into a conversation where their voice had become background noise. And for the person on the receiving end of that silence, the shift is profound. The noise fades, the distractions stop working. You begin to feel what they were feeling, the loneliness, the longing, the fatigue of carrying the emotional weight alone. You see the imbalance not just in how much was said, but in how little was understood. Silence creates the stillness required for that realization to take root. It clears the space needed for someone to ask the question, what part did I play in this? And while those answers aren't always comfortable, they are necessary, because no one changes in the noise. People change when the quiet forces them to see what the noise covered up. Sometimes silence ends relationships, but other times it saves them, because in the reflection it brings, you find truth, and with truth comes the possibility of accountability, growth, and better choices, if you're willing to listen to what the silence is really saying. Silence isn't always temporary. Sometimes silence is the end, and it doesn't always arrive with warning signs or dramatic exits. There are no slammed doors, no final text messages full of anger or closure. No emotional outbursts, just stillness, a quiet that slowly replaces what used to be full of meaning and connection. People often misunderstand what silence really means. We tend to think it's a phase, a moment, a space someone takes before they come back. But sometimes that silence isn't a pause, it's the last chapter. It's the decision someone made in their heart long before they stopped speaking. When a person goes quiet, especially someone who used to show up with consistency, emotion, and effort, it's not always a test or a tactic. It's not them playing games. It might be them finally accepting that there's nothing left to say, that their voice no longer matters in a space where it was once given so freely. There's something sacred about a person's energy. When they speak up, when they share their feelings, when they try to resolve the conflict, those are signs of hope. It means they still believe in the relationship enough to invest their vulnerability into it, but when that effort fades into silence, it usually means something within them has shifted, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. They've likely replayed every conversation, given every benefit of the doubt, waited for change, held on through the emotional drought, until one day the silence became their only form of self-protection, the only boundary they could set without causing more conflict. And so, instead of yelling, instead of explaining for the 100th time, they just stop. And for the other person, it can be confusing, sometimes even maddening. Suddenly, the person who used to check in every day no longer responds. The one who once asked about your well-being now leaves your messages on read. The voice you took comfort in has disappeared into absence. At first, you think it's temporary. Maybe they're just busy. Maybe they need space. Maybe they'll come back when they've had time to cool off. But as the hours turn into days and the days into weeks, a different reality begins to settle in. The silence isn't accidental. It's intentional, and it carries a message louder than words ever could. I'm done explaining why I feel the way I feel. You see, not all goodbyes are spoken, some are felt. They show up in the disconnect, in the conversations that don't happen, in the comfort that's been withdrawn, in the consistent energy that now feels like a ghost of what once was. And when that happens, you realize this silence isn't an intermission, it's the credits rolling. There's a heartbreaking kind of closure that silence delivers. It doesn't give you the courtesy of a farewell speech. It doesn't wrap everything up in a way that makes sense. It just exists calmly and firmly as a sign that the relationship has already ended in someone's heart. And what hurts even more is realizing that the goodbye didn't happen in a single moment. It happened over time, slowly, silently, and gently, every time they were unheard, every time they were dismissed, every time their effort was met with indifference. So when silence arrives, it may already be too late. It's the product of too many moments where someone asked to be seen and wasn't. Too many times they reached out and felt like they were holding the relationship together alone. And when they finally stop speaking, it's because they're no longer trying to hold anything together. In many cases, silence is the kindest way they know how to leave, because they no longer want to argue. They no longer have the energy to explain themselves to someone who only listens when things fall apart. They leave quietly, not because they didn't care, but because they cared more than they were ever given credit for, and they can't afford to keep breaking themselves just to be heard. So when someone goes silent, pay attention, because their silence might not be asking for attention. It might be giving you their final answer. We rarely recognize the value of presence while we still have it. When someone shows up for us day after day, emotionally, mentally, physically, we start to see their presence as a constant. We get used to their good morning messages, the way they remember the little things, the way they check in when our voice changes or when we sigh without realizing it. Their presence becomes so integrated into our daily lives that it feels like it will always be there. But presence is not promised. It's not something we're owed. It's something people choose to give us. And that choice is made every single day when someone chooses to be present with you, whether it's in the small, quiet moments or the big, chaotic ones. They are making a decision to stay connected, to care. To support. It might not always look grand or dramatic, but it shows up in the way they remember your favorite song, in the way they text you when they know you have a tough day ahead, in the way they give you space when you need it without making you feel abandoned. We notice these things in the beginning, we admire the consistency, we're grateful for it, but slowly we start to expect it. We assume they'll always check in, always listen, always understand. We begin to move through the relationship with the quiet confidence that their presence is a given. Until it isn't, and when that presence disappears, even momentarily, it can be shocking. The silence is louder, the gap feels wider than we thought it would. The absence reveals how much space they were actually holding in our lives, space we never fully acknowledged while they were still filling it. This is often when regret sets in. Not just because they're gone, but because we didn't realize just how deeply woven their presence had become into our emotional well-being. We remember the nights they stayed up with us, the way they calmed our anxiety with just a few words, the way they made the world feel just a little bit softer. And in their absence, those things don't just vanish, they echo. It's easy to take people for granted when they're consistent, when someone is always there, always showing up, always putting in the effort. It creates a sense of emotional safety. But emotional safety shouldn't mean emotional invisibility. Just because someone doesn't demand recognition doesn't mean they don't deserve it. People leave not because they stopped caring, but because they stopped feeling seen, because their effort became expected instead of appreciated, because their emotional presence was treated like wallpaper, something that's always there in the background, unnoticed, until the room feels empty. Presence is one of the most intimate forms of love. It's not just about being physically near someone. It's about choosing to hold space for them even when life is busy, even when things aren't perfect, even when you're tired. And when someone does that for you, it's a gift. A quiet, steady gift that deserves to be honored. It doesn't take grand gestures to show someone you value them. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of acknowledgement, a thank you, a how are you really, a hand on their back when they feel overwhelmed. A pause in your day just to say, I see you, and I appreciate everything you do, even the things you think I don't notice. So if there's someone in your life who shows up for you consistently, quietly, without needing to be asked, don't wait to appreciate them. Tell them, show them, because presence isn't permanent. It's a choice someone makes again and again, until one day they no longer can. Sometimes the loudest kind of loss isn't when someone walks away. It's when someone fades from your life without a sound because they spent too long feeling invisible, and by the time we realize their presence was the glue holding everything together, we're left staring at the empty space they once filled, wondering how we missed something that mattered so much. Value them now, while they are still within reach, because once presence turns into absence, you don't just lose a person, you lose the version of them that was still choosing you. Thank you.